County.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. I'd like to thank the Market Central Committee. I'd like to thank the city itself. And I'd like to thank you people for coming, because I always say the people who show up are the most important people. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. I should just take this out so I don't have to. Yes, it's okay. Are the lights all right? All right, so this is. It's not going. There we go. So this is, we've got, a full little afternoon here, and I'd like to go through some general topics about these markets. I've heard people use the word market. I tell people I work in markets, and they look at me like, stock market, marketing, Wall Street, Madison, what do you mean markets? It's actually a good question of many, many different types of markets, and we need to start getting. You all need to start getting on the same page about what you have. And I was at the market this morning. It's a great market. You've got great assets, you've got a great location, you've got great people that shop there that love the market, you've got an excellent vendor pool. So you're way ahead of the game. A lot of the cities I work in would come to a place like Charlottesville and go home and say, wow, we would like to have what they have here. But they don't have the vendors, they don't have the operating history, they don't have a location. So even though you think you might have some issues to deal with, you're way ahead of many, many places in many cities in the market world. So we'll talk about the markets and the revival, the different types of markets, and what makes markets successful, and then look at a couple of market scenarios of places or markets that are having some issues somewhat similar to yours and how they're dealing with it. And then we'll open it up to some questions and some discussions. So today is the 3rd anniversary of this market tragedy. Does anybody know where this is?
Baltimore?
Was? DC, exactly. April 30th, 2008, this market was unattended in the early morning hours and basically burned to the ground. The brick walls were standing, but it burned to the ground. The police commissioner called the mayor of Washington, D.C., and it was still dark outside. And there was silence on the phone when the mayor heard that the market burned down. And he said, "Oh my God, it's the most important place in the whole city." And they were silent. And I want you to know that your market is the most important place in the city. Any market is the most important place in the city. But DC was dithering prior to the conflagration, and some people say it was arson that was actually never solved. They don't really know why the market burned down. People were crying. The market meant so much to them, and they couldn't even describe it. It was an emotional reaction that they had lost their market. It was like they had lost something very important in their lives. And they just had to peek through the windows, and that the hurt went deeper. They felt that a part of their soul had burned along with the market. But the city got together very quickly. The congresswoman from Washington, D.C., Eleanor Holmes Norton, she threw around some of her weight in Congress, and was very quickly they were able to come up with the funds needed to rebuild the market and to maintain continuous operations to build a temporary market across the street so that the vendors could remain in business and the continuity and the tradition of the market could continue while they watched the new market rise from the ashes across the street. They came up with $22 million to rebuild their market. And it was not difficult to raise that market. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to start with this story is you don't want to wait until it is too late. You don't want to have a tragedy catapult you into some constructive decision making. You've got incredibly smart people, and this must be one of the smartest towns in all the United States, to be able to solve the problem of what is the future of our market going to be? Everybody wants to keep the market. Everybody wants to have a successful market. And you have the resources here to do it. It's just a matter of figuring it out. What is a market? In a couple of words, what would you say? What is a market? Does anyone want to say? Have an idea? A gathering place. Excellent. But all markets, there are lots of different types of markets, but basically, from where we're coming from, they have public goals, they operate in public spaces, and they serve locally owned and operated businesses. This is nothing new. It is something that all cultures and all people share. We had to learn to get along at the market. In order to eat, we had to learn to get along and to create a place and a means of exchange to support each other, to get through the day. And it's not an American thing, it's not an African thing, it's not an Asian thing. You said the magic word. The markets are the original gathering place. This is my hometown of Philadelphia. This is Water Street. This is where the city actually began. And where did it begin? It began around the market. They first started out with an open place where just people would informally sell. But the town was laid out in 1682 by William Penn with a wide, it was called High Street then, which is where the markets were set up. And they had started with one market house, two market houses, three market houses, and eventually they went up 10 blocks. Whoops. You've got a great market history in Virginia. The people that run the market in Alexandria say that it is the oldest continuously operated market in the United States. But I've heard many people in many cities say the same thing. Pike Place Market in Seattle was started in 1907. If you look at their website, they say they're the oldest market in the United States. So it's sort of an ongoing joke in the market world. Everybody says they're the oldest market around. But Alexandria still continues, and one of the earlier forms of the market was the market on the first floor and the city hall was above. So it showed you how important the marketplace was. The market and the city government were actually in the same place. This is a project that we recently worked on, Roanoke, which is, in Virginia terms, is a newer town. But it was beautifully laid out with a large central square. The market originally started out as an open-air market, and it had one market house. I think it's in its third market house on that site. And that market house in the center of town defines downtown Roanoke. And the idea of the market as the central gathering place is ancient. Everybody's heard of the agora in Greece. And with the municipal or the sacred place above the market, and that the basis of it is not political, it's not a power play, it's a human scale, mundane, but profound undertaking. And markets don't have to be fancy. They just have to be accessible, they have to be comfortable, and they have to work on a human scale, physically, and with all of our sensory organs that draw us towards a transaction. Who knows where this is? This is Boston. Boston, the most important real estate in Boston was their marketplace. The first market was the taller brick building in the back, which is Faneuil Hall, and then they outgrew that, so they built a new market in 1826. So it's 185th anniversary this year. Happy birthday, Quincy. In front of it. And as we know today, Quincy Market is no longer a public market. It is a tourist market. And I did some work with Jim Raskin, and he said that he was very proud because he said that people went to Quincy Market for no reason at all. It's just to be entertained. And that's really an exploitation of what a market should be about, where you go for something very basic to support yourself, to put food into your body to live. It doesn't get more important than that. New York City started out as a market town, with markets occupying some of the premier real estate there. and they would bring the goods in from around the world, clipper ships, and the local fish would come in, shoot it in the back of the market, sell it out in front of the market house. This, in Washington, D.C., the center market was torn down as part of the L'Enfant plan to create the new federal campus. This was also known as the Martian Market because it was at 6th and Pennsylvania Avenue and would often flood. And this was built by the architect was this guy Adolf Plus, and he felt that markets were embodied democracy, and that the accessibility and the scale and the uses and the inclusiveness of markets had to be reflected in the architecture. One of the last remaining market systems in the United States is in Baltimore. This is one of its historic markets that burned down in the 1950s. It has subsequently been rebuilt. The Lexington market. Every city had a market. This is in the upper, that's New Orleans. That market is still there, the French market. The Market Square in Norfolk, Virginia, and the market on the other side is in Hawaii. But as we redefined what the future was going to be in this country, we became embarrassed by the markets. We were ashamed of the markets. We thought that they were something that should go out of fashion, like wigs and hair powder, and that they were something that had to be obliterated. And we invested into highway systems that destroyed African American neighborhoods and stable areas and cities. And we destroyed inadvertently our local economies. The market on this bottom over here is in Savannah. That's a beautiful building, and it was lost in the 1950s. It was a terrible battle to save the market. A small group of people tried to save it. And when they lost that battle, they said, we will never lose another battle again. And the modern historic preservation movement grew out of the loss of that market in Savannah. Market squares, the central places in our city, which once were built for markets. Here are a couple of examples in Knoxville, Tennessee, where they got rid of the classic market, and then they put in this, groovy, weird 1970s modern iteration of a market square, and it failed. So we have to be very careful about following these trendy design things, as if those are more important than the long-standing traditions of things like markets. In Harrisburg, the old market square sheds were removed for the very more powerful street markets that had a lot more influence in City Hall than those little old farmers that were dragging their horses and potatoes into the city. Some of the old markets were turned into other uses, like the old market in St. Louis that was turned into a Drury Lane hotel. You can actually stay there today if you go into St. Louis. Well, these markets are gone. Beautiful, beautiful examples. Cincinnati, Fort Wayne, Norfolk's gone, New York Farms are gone. And those that remain in the cities, just watch this stuff dissolve away. The cities lost their sense of importance. They lost that centeredness. They lost that sense of gathering. For what? For what? For these paved over fields that used to grow things to support us, to accommodate the growing people that were given GI bills because to buy a new house, but they couldn't use a GI bill to restore an old house in the city. It was a disinvestment, purposeful disinvestment in our cities. So we became kind of crazy. We started living these TV dreams and the fast food dreams, but we weren't happy. There was a great dissatisfaction that we sort of lost each other. But there was a crazy old hippie types. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there was this movement in the 1960s to go back to the land and to go back to some of these institutions and these places that we left behind that had some value because the styrofoam mentality just wasn't cutting it. So I do give the hippies a lot of credit for reviving the market movement in this country by taking a chance and working, not making any money, but striving with a purpose that would have a very long-term positive effect on this country. And we have seen an enormous revival of markets in this country. There are less than 100 historic markets left in the United States. We really, really cut our connection with the market traditions. And the USDA has been tracking the growth of markets up to 2004, and people in 2004 thought, wow, it just can't get any better than this. We're really peaking out. But the numbers keep growing. People really like these markets. They are reaching people on a molecular level. There is something about them which is often difficult to describe in words as to why these things work. It's well beyond the economics. It's well beyond the transactional value that these markets are bringing back to our cities. We've got a rare grant to actually do some real research into what's going on with these markets from the Ford Foundation. And we studied markets all over the country and found all these wonderful things are going on. And we did surveys of customers and vendors. And people love the fact, over and over again, that it brings people together, that it activates public space, that it starts to shape growth and minimize sprawl, that it promotes public health. And the public health thing is coming on very strong these days, providing economic opportunities, boosting local economies, building local food systems, and renewing downtowns and neighborhoods. I mean, that's pretty good. What some people think are just these quaint little old markets. There's a lot more going on than actually meets the eye. So let's look at some of the different types of markets and the evolution of markets. From the simple and the most common form of market, the open air market, all the way up to what we're calling a market district. So these are the most prevalent around the world. They're the easiest, the lowest cost markets to run, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the middle of a city or whether you're in the middle of a desert. The market phenomenon is practically the same. You can do it on the street. You can do it in a square. You can do it in front of the city hall. You can do it by a church. You can do it by the waterfront. It really doesn't matter. You just need space. Moving along in the evolution, once some markets develop that sense of we're going to be here for a while, they say, well, it'd be nice to have a roof over our head so we don't get rained on. It'd be nice to have some water, a little bit of infrastructure to make it a little more comfortable for vendors and for the shoppers. So it's the shed. The re-arrival of the shed is a step that you can be thinking about here. And we're seeing some new sheds being built. This is on your left is a shed in Little Rock, Arkansas that's behind an indoor market. And on the right is a new shed that was built in Toledo, Ohio. Their Congresswoman, Marcy Kaplan, was the radical Democrat on the Agricultural Appropriation Subcommittee, and she was able to get them money to pay for the construction of that. And as we move, a market shed can evolve into a market hall, but it doesn't have to. Some market sheds can stay around for hundreds of years. But you can see the transitional style, like in the upper right-hand corner there, the French market is a market shed that is becoming a market hall. And on the left of that, you can see underneath that market hall what it grew from a market shed. And on the lower right is Shed 3 in Detroit, Michigan, which is one of the great revival stories of markets in the country today. The market hall. On this octagonal one is in Fredericksburg. I was trying to get as many examples of Virginia markets as I could. And the one on the right, doesn't that look like a Stacy market? That's in Royan, France. It's kind of cool, but it's a little funny. And the Reading Terminal Market, which I ran in Philadelphia, is a market hall, but it started out as an open-air market, and then it went into a shed. It was a shed for maybe 150 years, and then it went into a market hall, and then that market hall was too small, and they built another market hall. So this is actually its third or fourth iteration. It's 2 acres, 75,000 square feet. That's about 150,000 people a week shop there. Some beautiful examples of market halls are in Europe. Some of you have probably been to the Boqueria in Barcelona, which at our last market conference, we gave that award as the best market in the world. This is really an amazing place. It's part of the original city plan of Barcelona, and it's tied into a local agricultural system. It was also part of the original city plan, where no citizen of Barcelona would be more than a 10-minute walk to a market. They have dozens of markets in Barcelona. The new market built in the United States was in Milwaukee, and they had some luck going there in the beginning. They kind of overdid it. They didn't really have a strong market tradition, and it has morphed from a farmer's market to more of a lunch market, serving the downtown office population. So you've got to watch your things and be careful about the direction of the market. This is some shots of the ferry terminal marketplace in San Francisco that actually grew out of the outdoor market that was setting up on land owned by the Port Authority of San Francisco. And the people that own the building and private developers said, wow, look at all these people that are going to that market. We can do something on the inside. Where you develop the inside as a market hall for permanent tenants, which is open 7 days a week, and the outdoor market is open 3 or 4 days a week. But the sales of the indoor market go up on the days that the outdoor market is in operation. And the most mature form of market is the market district, which it's a public market, but it has farmers markets, it has permanent tenants, it has housing, it has restaurants, it has daycare centers, it has city streets going through it. And I think that you have the makings of a market district here. You actually have an open-air market, but it's a very mature open-air market, a very sophisticated kind of open-air market that has a lot of potential to influence development around it. So some examples of market districts. You saw the agro before, and then below that is the plan of the city of Roanoke, showing you the prominent placement of the city market building. And all those little hash lines are farmers' places. So the farmers can also come into the city, they back up to the curb, and they sell off the back of their truck onto the sidewalk, and they build these beautiful system of canopies that cover the sidewalk, so it's a viable shopping area, high water or rain. And then the river, Little Rock, that whole warehouse, they redid the warehouse district, it was mostly abandoned buildings, using the market to redefine that area, and now it's called the market district. Eastern Market, Washington, D.C. is a market district. There's about a 10,000 or 15,000 square foot indoor market building. They have multiple markets that operate on the outside. They have farmers' shed. They have flea markets. They have craft markets. They have holiday markets. And then private real estate also around play off the market and outdoor seating and their business is driven by the traffic created by the market. Historically, every town, and I'm trying to sort of suss out where is this market district? You have a market district here somewhere. There was that place where there was the distribution of food, the wholesaling, retailing, and all the related industries that would have to support that. And most of these were gone or torn down. The cities that have remaining historic market districts are now looking at them as really, really cool places. And those that tore them down, like Paris, they put up something modern, and they moved layout for a wholesale market way out to the outskirts of the city, tied into the airport, the rail lines, and the highway system. But it really brought something incredible from the heart of Paris. How many people have been to New York City? Most people, okay. I don't want to compare any place to New York, but there's a lot of people with a lot of money in New York, and they have a lot of markets. The green market system, which is their farmers market system that produces all that sell in parks, on school grounds, in the streets, they have about 55 of them in New York City right now. But they opened up another 55 markets in New York City that fail. So just because you want to open a market, or just because you have a lot of people and a lot of money, doesn't mean a market is going to work. So how do you separate a successful market from a market that's going to fail? There are a lot of fatal mistakes that you can make in the market. They're not guaranteed. So over the years, I've been doing this now for 30 years, I've learned a few things. And I've distilled it down to these 10 basic areas that we'll run through. The most important thing are the vendors. If you don't have good vendors in your market, forget it. But in a good market, each vendor is drawing their own trade to that market. And once you get a good market going, you're going to get a lot of secondary vendors who are not going to be drawing their own trade in the market, but they will want to live off the trade that the people on either side of them are going to generate. So when you're deciding who are the best vendors for the market, you want a vendor that's going to draw their own trade and make everyone stronger as a group. And it's obvious, quality is extremely important, but how do you find quality? And it's the lady who sells the egg. She looks at each egg by hand with her own eyeballs and inspects it before she puts it into your bag and sells it to you. Because she's going to see you next week, and she wants you to come back happy. And a lot of the markets, a lot of vendors say, well, I'll come into the market, but I don't want to be a cheese person. I don't want anybody else selling cheese at the market. And I've got the best cheese around and says, I'm really the only person you need. Sorry, a market is all about competition and internal competition. And if you don't like it, and for a vendor, it can be a little scary because it makes it you're not going to get every dollar that goes through the market. And if you don't like it, you should open up a store. It takes a special kind of ability and enjoyment in that competitive world to compete. Sorry. All right, the 3-second rule. I am fascinated as to how do people decide when to buy something in one of these markets? Like today, walking around the market, there's so much stuff to look at, and I don't live here, so it's easy. I'm not going to buy anything. But people think very quickly. They call it the 3-second rule. They decide in 3 seconds or less that they're going to buy something. So a vendor has to be able to tell a lot of different stories in 3 seconds. And that a typical market stall, and this goes back for thousands of years, is about as big as that. It's 2 meters. And when you're walking slowly through a market, it takes about 3 seconds to walk that stall measurement. Are there any brain surgeons in here? Anybody want something optic nerve? Because when you the eyeballs, there's so much going on. People buy their eyes first. So it goes into the eyeball, and then there's that optic nerve is unbelievable. It just makes it right back into the brain. And then the brain, it's telling your hand to walk towards the tomato, or walk towards the lettuce, or walk on by, or put your hand into your wallet. And this millions of things are happening in 3 seconds. So let's look at some quick, 3-second exact past the 3-second rule. Do you know what they're selling? Do you know how much it costs? Are you interested? That's pretty good. Yes, I would say she passes 3. Those guys, that's good. The display's not great, but it's a great show. They're rolling cigars in some of the old bargaining markets in New York City. Getting sick of stuff's on the ground. I'm not spending a lot of money on the stuff, but it works. You know what's going on. This is never really be allowed in the United States. This is a fishmonger right in downtown Rome. And I don't think anyone's dying buying this stuff yet, but what a great display. And I don't think that display costs more than $10. It's a beautiful, beautiful display, and it's all just emanating from a box. It's not going to Home Depot and spending hundreds of dollars to put a beautiful display together. This is at the Union Square Market in New York. They let dogs in their market. You don't want dogs in their market. That's pretty good. Corners are very hard to display because you've got that corner that needs something on. This is a great sign. if you were blind, you didn't know what they were selling there. There's no product display. That's good. She's doing a good job. She's a little tired. She's got a good display. It's very difficult to sell meat, poultry, and stuff at the market because you can't see it. So how do you get that story across? It's very difficult. And you can try to make out some signs and everything, but there's nothing better than the stuff itself. This is actually an illegal vendor. A good market will attract vendors that sort of show up and start selling things and they don't have any permits or anything. But she actually gets huge action points. It actually has a lot of color and character to the market. This is in Amsterdam. Again, it's just very simple, very nice display. This is in Leaden Hall, one of the oldest art markets in London. It's terrible. It's it's fancy, but it's not very good display. See, this guy's got it down. In 3 seconds. This is weird. It's a funny product mix with flip-flops and produce in the same stand. It kind of makes it a little weird, tough on the brain there. This is also not good. If you're looking vertically, you've got about 8 or 10 feet to play with. I mean, they're using about 6 inches of their display opportunity on that 10-foot vertical display plane. And this is where management has to kind of get involved and say, no, you can't do that. You've got to do something more like this. I want to see the stuff. This is the DuPont Circle Market in Washington, D.C. What do you think she's selling? Air. She's selling oysters in the world. It's hard to do some of those things. All right, let's get to the harder, the location. You've got to have the right location. A lot of people say, we want to have a market. If we have a market here, it means that we're going to have all these people and all this great stuff happening, which is the reverse of how markets come to be. You have to start with a good location. In Gigi Castaneda, they set the market up in front of the church. And that's an age-old tradition with markets setting up in front of sacred spaces. And the sacred space meant that, yes, the eye of God was going to guarantee you're going to get a good weight, you're not going to get shortchanged, you're not going to get mugged in the market. In Charleston, they're restoring that market as we speak. You see the long spine that goes for 4 blocks, occupying what it was and is still incredibly valuable real estate. You have to see it. One of the old tricks in England, they used to call these things market crosses, and they would put these big markers to mark the site of the market, and also indicated that it was sort of blessed by the God and Queen too, that we were permitted to do so. And Pike Place Market is integrated into the city streets, and Paris was the defining place for a large area in downtown Paris, and you come at it from all sorts of different directions. And once you get to a market, you have to have a good flow. People have to, get from A to B. You want every place in the market to get a shot at those eyeballs, to get a shot at someone thinking, giving it 3 seconds, can I buy something here? And the right location has, when you leave the market, there should be all sorts of things you're remembering about that market. And I love the last quote, the spark of contact, which D.H. Lawrence wrote a chapter about the markets in Oaxaca and his book, Mornings in Mexico. And he studied human behavior at markets. And he loved markets because he said that at that moment where the transaction occurs, where the two people, where the money, where the thing from the earth that was grown from the sun and the rain all comes together, that spark of contact is part of those many, many thousands of listening moments that you get at the market every day. If you don't have a parking problem, a lot of ours say, oh, it's such a bad parking problem. Well, you know what's worse than a bad parking problem? Not having a bad parking problem. Because if you've got a good location, you're going to have a parking problem. You're always going to have a parking problem. And guess what? People sort of figure it out. But you also need to figure it out. You cannot have parking at a market the more expensive parking tends to be, like the Reading-Kilmer Market. If you park across the street from the Reading-Kilmer Market now, and you go over 2 hours, and how much it is to park? $20. So the market negotiated with the owner of the parking garage, does a lot of deals with the city, and they said, we have to have affordable parking. So now there's a validation system, so if you spend just to buy a few little things at the market, you don't have to, there's not even a minimum expenditure amount. You can get your parking down to $3 or $4, which is really so cheap. And other markets have free validation systems, so it must be addressed. And the right location is well connected. I love that picture of Baltimore Market with the cherries, where people can walk in the market, and the old trolley systems that every town used to have could bring everybody from every different neighborhood into the city could reach into these markets. Oh, I'm sorry. The right location, the spin-off opportunities. For a city, markets have great power. Markets create valuable real estate. Cities themselves start around markets. So, knowing that, when you place a market or choose a location, you're going to create value. So, where do you want to create that value, and what kind of investments do you want to bring in around that market? And I don't just mean the big investments of someone who's going to open up a coffee shop across the street, or someone who's going to build a hotel at the Pike Place Market. It goes all the way back down to economic opportunity to the bagman, who can also show up at the market day and sell bags for 25 cents. So it's not just economic opportunities for rich people, it's at every spectrum. Other considerations are weather. I noticed the sun was really pounding down some of the places today. Size is definitely an issue. The market's was very full today. What is the community context? Sometimes people say edge locations are good. If the market is embedded in one area, in one section, it tends to just draw from that section. If it's on an edge, and you can start bringing Group A or Neighborhood A and B together, that makes for a stronger market. Who owns it? How much is it going to cost? What is the condition of the site? And what is the investment that's going to be required? A lot of things. I saw your site selection criteria is very good, the things that you put together in terms of how you evaluate where your market should go in the future. The right mix is many times, is it a farmer's market? Is it a farmers and resellers market? You've got farmers and artisans or crafts markets. Some markets separate them, some markets put them together. Some markets will have them together, but they'll have the craft people on one street and the farmer people on the other side of the street with the public spaces in the middle. There are bird markets. I've seen art markets, holiday markets. They used to have hair markets, live animal markets. There are markets where you can go if you want to rent an apartment in some cities where everybody shows up who's got something or a place to rent. They can start posting things on trees. There are all sorts of different things. But a good mix always has the internal competition. Who knows what those ladies are selling down there? Those funny looking baskets.
Green bean.
What?
Green bean.
Street beans, no? Truffles. That's a truffle market. And they look none too pleased with the competition. And you want the owner behind the stall. You want the guy or the woman who did it to be the person selling it to get their primary energy. It makes all the difference. And even if you have a lot of bakeries within the market, a lot of people selling meat or produce, you want everybody to have a slightly different style so the customer has lots of choices when they go to the market. And the right mission. It shouldn't be some ad hoc thing where we're just all kind of getting together to buy and sell stuff. Why are we doing this? And I think you are clear about why you're doing this, but I haven't really seen anything in writing about what this market is or what it's all about or where you're headed. It just seems to be sort of this kind of fuzzy agreement that you all have with each other, but it might help you to sort of clarify some of these things. Helping vendors, improving places. And the socialization thing is big. It's one of the real underlying reasons why people like these markets. And it's these very casual social conversations that are the real building blocks of community. I don't know why it's so easy to talk to people at a market, but boy, do people talk at a market. And a guy at Davis, California did a study, the social ecology of supermarkets versus farmers markets. And he found that people at farmers markets tend to have 7 conversations, where at a supermarket, you're lucky to get a harumph at the checkout counter. Increasing the health of the community, the money that's made at the market is getting reinvested purposefully back into improving that marketplace. It's helping to preserve local agriculture, and people are happy in the market. And Harvard is starting to study what is happiness worth. It's worth a lot, and markets are a very happy place, and that is worth a lot. We get called in to help design a lot of markets, and I have yet to meet an architect who was taught about markets in school. There is not a school in this country that teaches anyone about markets, which is unbelievable considering how central, how important, and how prevalent markets were to the development of our cities and to the development of the law of this land. Did you know that municipal legislation in this country grew out of market legislation? That is a fact that is not very well documented. But when we're designing a market, we say, it's not how big are the aisles, how are we going to get the trucks in, no, we say, where's the public space? What is going to make people like to be here? What is the best spot? Where are the power spots in this market? Where's the best hangout place? And then you design your market around that. It's a complete opposite way of how most architects design something, where they design everything and then at the end, we need to throw in a bench here, or we need to throw in a bench here. And if you think like that, you will design a better market. And the right public spaces, you want the sense of entry. It was great when I walked from the hotel to the market, but you look around the corner and you see the little top of the tent, and your heart quickens as you get closer to the market. You're almost like a little kid again, and you're going into a better world. You're going into this benevolent place that's going to make you better. That's going to give you something that's going to make you happy and live longer. That's pretty good. But don't build something that you can't maintain. So you're better off underbuilding something, making it a little lower key, and keep it looking nice. And you can always add money and add amenities to these places over time. And they should not feel intimidating. They should feel really, really comfortable. Not be over-designed. You don't want your market to win a design award. That would be a curse. And you want to put people at ease. If people are disarmed, they're comfortable, they're going to have more social conversations, and they're going to spend more money. And you want to have flexibility in those public spaces. One of my favorite market squares is in Rome, and they've got the market there in the morning, and it's amazing. That little orange truck, every cucumber and every display fixture and every scale comes out of there like the circus, and they set up this beautiful display, and then it's like 11 or whatever, they put it all back in. Then the cafe tables come out on the square. And then in the evening they have concerts, or they have movies in the square. So the market square, or the marketplace, should not be designed just for a market. It should have lots of flexible uses. And you want to build a sense of community. You've definitely got that going on here. Markets never have enough money, so you've got to involve other people's money in there. Because you've got all the bodies there, you can attract people whose mission overlaps the market and let them get involved, and they can become sponsors. Like in Kansas City, the local HMO pays for the farmers markets because they get to put their name on that or something. And they run a shuttle from downtown, bringing seniors to the market. So there's all sorts of creative ways to stretch to your advertising, your limited advertising dollars. Trying green ways. We want to get less people driving to these markets, even though they spend more money than before. walk right to the markets, but connecting it in as many ways into mixed-use development around it will make the market stronger, and it will make those things around the market, the housing and the retail, more valuable, and that place, that city, a more desirable place to live. And using the market to rebuild the local economy. Unlike what I like them all because you've got a lot of independent shops there. Unlike the malls in the outskirts in the suburb, the big FedEx truck comes and all the money is shipped out to corporate headquarters sprinkled all around the country. But the money at your market is staying local and is being reinvested into your community and building the local communities, local economies, which we did a very good job of wrecking. The article there from the New York Times talks about how sales in the surrounding stores go up the days that the market is there. And you want subliminally people to feel that when they're shopping at the market, they're kind of investing into their local community. Pike Place Market, 1907, oldest market in the United States, not. Is an 8.5-acre historic market district, and they just put it's a very complicated place. It's built on. You think you got some problems there? They're really slow, and they needed about $50 or $60 million to rebuild the infrastructure of the market. So that last year they put it on a ballot referendum to the voters, to the people of Seattle, and said we need $50 or $60 million to rebuild this market. And they're not going to change the market, and it was passed. Because the people, the citizens of Seattle know that investing in that market they're investing in themselves in making the city a better place that makes them happy to live there. And keeping the money local. Isn't it ironic that we have to beg from the USDA to get a couple of bucks to help the market movement in this country? Because I know that it's all going to the cotton farmer that sits home all day and gets more money than all the markets combined for not doing anything. But the Chinese have invested over $1 billion in their public markets because they know that small business builds big business. I can't believe that they leapfrogged ahead of us in the market. Really, it burns me up. Probably the two most important things, having been a manager of one of these markets, are leasing, getting the right vendors in there, and promoting the heck out of these places. And you never have enough money. This is the old French market down in New Orleans. You really got to stretch that advertising dollars by doing, and I know you're doing some of these, having cooking demonstrations, music, getting the vendors to do funny things. And one of the old traditions of the market was in the beginning of the year, you could do this. You get some of the farmers to bring their farm animals in and dress them all up. Then you walk around the town. You have a parade going to the market. That's the opening day. And you get a lot of good publicity and a lot of goodwill from doing fun things like that don't really cost any money at all. There's always a good story. You can be pitching the magazines, newspapers, radios, TVs. It was always either a good story or a good controversy in the market. And the right value, this whole idea, the sense of place is when you're at a market. When you go someplace else, where do you like to go? To the market to get a real sense of, what the people are like and what that place is like. And, with the world careening out of control and more bad news every day, there's something really comforting, really affirming on a very human level about the market and seeing the strength of the market, or the old American idea of self-sufficiency, which is still there and really coming back in the market world. This is a serious job, running these markets, but you better not take yourself too seriously or you'll end up in a movie game. But behind all these markets, a lot of people, you just sort of set up and just go over there, pay me your rent, don't get a trash behind. There's actually a lot more going on managerially in these markets than that. And we're seeing new forms of management in the old days, and for many, many years, many decades, cities ran markets. And cities still run markets in some places, but in a lot of cities, cities are getting out of the market management business and handing them over, unburdening themselves, frankly, from having to run these markets to other management entities that can do things and raise money that cities cannot do. And people say, is there like a national, we're looking for managers or something? No, it's national search. I said, no, you should always hire someone local that knows the local people, that knows what's going on. And there's no kind of person. I've met people that are used to work in a supermarket, and I would have thought they would be terrible, but they've been good at running markets. People that, housewives that are getting back into the workforce are good at running markets. Are all different types of people running these markets. It really just takes a commitment to do whatever it takes to make these things work. And those of you who run markets know what I'm talking. Some of the stuff you have to do with these markets, like the markets are all about relationships. I don't care what you put on paper. I've been in court many times on market issues, and I don't know what it is. The judges take all the papers and they push it aside. And they say, I've been in that market. What's the problem? Well, we have a lease, Your Honor. Oh, no, come on. What's the problem? And folk law seems to take over. So it really, to not get into trouble, you have to maintain good relations at all times with all people, which doesn't mean you can't fight. You can fight as long as you make up the next day. Okay, sure. Okay, what's happening? There we go. You've got to be, a bit of an impresario, got to be good at getting the word out there. You've got to be very open about your business practices. Maintain the market. These are all the property management components of running a market are a given. But it's the intangible qualities of managing the market that are going to be what make the difference. The property management is very important. Having a good eye for merchandise is very important. Like taking the vendors from behind their stalls and saying, hey, let's just get out of there. Let's be a customer for a while. Walk it. Do you see if people were walking down your aisle, do you see what they're looking, how they see your stall? And sometimes their eyes will pop over and they'll change their display. A market is a theater in the round. You've got to be able to look at what your stall or understand what people see from your stall from every angle, at all times. And there's a lot of traffic copy and coordination with these markets. The city owns the property, the city runs the market. The merchants think it's their market. The customers think it's their market. People across the street, we're paying all these taxes. Why do those people come in here for X number of dollars? The neighbors are, why do I can't park in front of my house? All this stuff goes on. So you got to try to keep everybody happy. And you've got to be fair. You've got to be consistent. You can't make special deals here and there. But you've got to be firm because these markets can get out of control. And once they get out of control, it's very hard to bring them back again. It's all this all day long. Dispute stuff. I've had death threats against me. Any good market managers have death threats against me. You've got to be planning ahead. You're not just thinking of tomorrow or the next day. You're thinking long term. And in your situation here, you do it. You've got some very serious long-term issues to think about here in terms of your location, in terms of the investment, in terms of what kind of a market that you want in the future. And leasing and promotion. Leasing and promotion. Those are the two things you really don't want to make a mistake on because if you don't do them well, that'll sink you faster than anything else. Getting the right vendors does not mean answering the phone and saying, what do you want to sell? Yes or no. You got to leave the market, you got to go up driveways, you got to go to farms, you got to talk to people, you've got to recruit, you've got to curate that market to give it the merchandise mix that's going to keep your customers happy. And the merchandise mix is very fluid. Food, fashions change. This local thing is is hit, it was organic, and it's going to change again, and you've got to be ready to go with it. Promotion, I didn't talk about this enough. Then there are some for-profit, believe it or not, some of these markets are run for-profit. In San Francisco, it's a combination. The outdoor market is run by a not-for-profit, and the indoor market is run by a for-profit developer. There are a few private public markets, including the Grand Central Market in Los Angeles, really nice market. But the good majority of markets are run today by nonprofits. The Eastern Market, DC, in Detroit, which is the largest historic market district left in the downtown, was run since the 1800s by the city of Detroit. We just worked with them for many years to set up a not-for-profit corporation, which has just taken over the market, and the market is blooming. It is doing so well. They're getting all this money from foundations that never would have given the city any money, and it's becoming a very important place for the reinvention of Detroit and tied into the local economy and into urban agriculture. Incredibly important. The Findlay Market in Cincinnati. Has anyone been to that market? It's very nice. Very important. It anchors a historic African American neighborhood. And the city ran it for many years. They just set up a 501c3. It's doing much, much better. Cincinnati just put $25 million into the restoration of the market itself and into the area around it. The Reading Terminal, which I used to run, I worked for the Reading Railroad, and it was actually a private market. No, people thought it was a public market, and we lost it. It was taken by eminent domain by the state, and it's now run as a not-for-profit market. The Pike Place Market was actually a bunch of privately owned markets that are now owned by the city and run by essentially a 501c3. It's actually a state authority that operates very much in the same way as a 501c3 does. Some of the markets are hiring, which are publicly owned, like in Kansas City, is hiring a private real estate management company to run the market. And I just mentioned San Francisco. So, hope your vocabulary, your sense of the different opportunities and different types of markets are coming along. So now I want to, before we go into the Q&A, just to talk about some other markets that are having some issues that have some relevance to yours. And every market has, believe you me, has had issues. It's really never that easy when you're competing against these rich developers and rich real estate interests that can pay the big bucks. So you've got to mobilize the public support for these markets to be able to compete with those rich interests. And the future of cities should not be left to the highest bidder. Portland, Oregon has one of the best farmers markets in the United States. On the lower right was their first location. It started off on the river in a parking lot. And that quickly became a development site. Sounds familiar. And they had to move. And they went through great deliberation. It's a smart town. You're a smart town. Smart people tend to deliberate a lot. And they had a couple of options, and they ended up in the park. They moved closer into the actual center, the heart of downtown. And it wasn't a unanimous. Everybody didn't think it was a great idea. Some of the most resistance in Portland came from the vendors themselves, because on the river, they could drive their truck in and sell off the back of their truck. And it was easy. And when they went to the park block, the vendors had to deal with the offloading situation. They could come to their spot, offload, and then they would have to move their vehicle. And they said, I can't do that. I'm not coming back to the market. It's not going to work. Get out of here. But nobody, not a single vendor has left the market. It's actually, their traffic has probably quintupled since they moved to this new location. The sales have gone way up. And people figure it out. I mean, if you're going to make more money, if you're going to have more customers, if you're going to have a better location, a lot of these things can be figured out. So you have to, all of us have to be very cognizant of our knee-jerk no reaction at first, which tend to be a selfish reaction. and just calm down and think that yes, there are ways to work through some of these issues to make it work for everybody. And first, it has to work for the customers. First, I love the vendors. I've been a vendor myself, but unless it works for the customers, it's not going to work for you. And this is important. It's a wonderful, wonderful market, and it's really been a huge boom to the reinvention of their local and enlargement of their local food chain. We did some work in Santa Fe. Santa Fe had started out with a small market maybe 20 or 30 years ago. They moved around a couple of times, and then they were like, we're sick of moving around, and we want a permanent spot. So why crack we're going to get ourselves a permanent spot? And they went, they had a lot of community planning, meetings, workshops, and they really worked on it a long time. And the rail yard, which was available, was becoming available. And there was quite a bit of room there. But they didn't want to just move the market there. It wasn't just about having a place for trucks and people and transactions. They wanted to create a very strong place for the community. And they did. And they built an indoor market building that has multiple markets out there can be used for other things. You can have parties there, you can have different types of markets there. They have outdoor markets, or outdoor spaces for markets. And notice that the train still goes through there. So they're not obliterating the previous uses. So there are ways to deal with very complicated urban situations and solve these problems for all the different users. That is what the city is all about, the commitment to celebrating the complexity and working with the complexities not as a disadvantage, but as an advantage to the solution that you can come up with, and it can work. Ann Arbor, another university town, not that dissimilar from here, has a market. It wasn't a parking lot, but they redeveloped the parking lot. It was surrounded by old warehouses, and when the market created value, so the warehouses became retail facilities that turned around. Think of this as a market square and on the perimeter, the stores would sell off the street. Well, with the market there, the stores flip, and they're selling into the market square now, and that the green shape is a shed. So they built a cover a partial cover for the market, covering the walkways and the selling areas, and the trucks can still back up, and the customers will walk under the shed. And when the market's not there, it's covered parking. And it's now developed to this is what it looks like under the sheds with the market going in. The market's way busier than that usually. And what's like when the market's not there. And now the market has defined the area. Now they're calling it a lot. They're calling it the market district now. And they have other types of markets, artisan markets that are setting up under the shed. Davis, another similar town to Franklin University. That is the agricultural school within the University of California system. They have a great market, but they want something a little more permanent and a little bit more civically, with a little more civic value to it. So they have a great open community planning process with everybody chiming in, everybody's needs getting heard, and they integrated the market shed into a park. And it's called Central Park, so it's right in downtown, but it's beautifully integrated with fountains, with green areas, so when the market is not in operation, it's still a beautiful place where people like to be. And the market operates 2 days a week. It's a Wednesday and a Saturday market, and on Wednesdays, when it's Wednesday evening, the market also sponsors a big picnic. So they're more prepared for events. At the Wednesday market, people buy things and everyone sits around in the park and has a wonderful time. Santa Monica's got some good markets. Some of them, they just close the streets, and their markets are great. They did have a little bit of a problem. I don't know if you remember, an elderly gentleman brake, he was hitting his accelerator, and he went through the market, and they didn't have a proper safety system set up, and several people were killed at the market. So street markets can work very well. We absolutely have to be very, very careful about the safety issues there. And there are some very simple things that you can do to address that. Santa Monica also had another market in the parking lot, which we worked with them and the parking lot was next to a park, which was a little silly. We said, why don't you just make the whole thing a park instead of a parking lot and a park? And then when the market sets up in the parking lot, people feel like they're in the park rather than in a parking lot. It's cooler, it's nicer, it's more beautiful. And when the market's not there, you don't just have a big dumb parking lot just right next to the park. Make the park feel as it is bigger. It's just more flexible. It's just taking these things 2, 3, 4, 5 more steps along and come up with a better solution. One of the biggest market battles ever to preserve the market is the Pike Place Market in sometime in the 1970s. They were going to get rid of the market for a large convention center. So people mobilized very quickly. They had to save the market movement, and they blessed the citizens of Seattle. They went back to the voting box again, and they put it to the citizens about, are we going to save this market? And the citizenry voted, said, we don't want a convention, boring convention center. We want our market, and they won. And they got a UDAG grant, which is no longer available. But I think they got $35 million 30 or 40 years ago, which is serious money. And it is said that was the best UDAG grant in terms of economic development that ever came out of Washington, D.C. And that was a great watershed moment in the market where most was the saving of that White House market. And the more people you get involved, the better. The messier, the better. And then, of course, the hands like to show up. Well, hey, they gave $35 million and come and shake your hands. Pike it's a great place. Unfortunately, it's becoming a little bit succumbing to its own popularity. And the tourist effect is having a very negative impact on that market. Locals aren't going there as much because it's too touristic, and they've got markets, satellite markets in other neighborhoods. So you've got to have very strong controls in your use clauses in your leases to preserve the merchandise mix. The mix should not be allowed to just follow the quick buck, because that will cycle out very quickly. New York market. Their flagship is the market in Union Square, and when they started in Union Square, it's called Needle Park because there were more. This is kind of the drug hangout now. Of course, that's where all the rich pharmaceutical executives shop on Saturday morning, so it still is a drug park. And once they proved they got busier and busier, then the park started getting really upset because they were kind of messing up the park. But they loved the location, so they worked with the park, and they are actually a 501c3 that runs that market, which is housed in the mayor's office. So they're not really an independent 501c3, they're part of the Council on the Environment of New York City, so that they've got the heft of the mayor behind them. And they worked with the park because they were redesigning Union Square, but they integrated the infrastructural needs that the market had for bathrooms, for water, for shelter, for electricity into the redesign of the park. And it went very well. It was a struggle. But now that it's over, of course, everybody's taking credit for being their idea. And of course, at the beginning, everybody was disagreeing about the whole thing. And now it's just this great civic place in New York City, where people in the city feel like they're taking a little vacation out of the country every time they go through the market. The previous mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, saw the rise in real estate values in his city, and he said that the future of cities is about character. And if cities are just places for rich developers who get to trump traditional uses such as marketplaces, they'll just be places for rich people, and they won't become cities as we know and love them. And he said one of the most important things to keep in the cities were the traditional markets. So he made, unlike in Paris and New York, that got rid of their traditional markets in the 60s and 70s and 80s and pushed to the outskirts, they've now made a commitment in London to preserve the function of the market in the center of their cities. And this is their flagship market. It's really a cool market. If you get a chance to go to London, you should go there. It's only open for retail on weekends. And at the front of the market, they've got some office buildings and traditional retail shop fronts. And then as you go through that portal there and go into the market, it's basically like a big covered market. And all the farmers and the cheesemakers and the great artisanal producers and the ethnic food people, they all come in. It's this great place. And it's run by a board of trustees, which is the equivalent of what we have as the 501c3 in this country. So it's really run by the neighborhood, the people. And this is, I'm going to end with this is the controversy du jour. Has anyone been following the problem of the Hollywood market? Well, they've been there for maybe 30 years or something. And they operate in the street, so they closed the street. It started off with one block, and then it got really popular, then they went to another block. They've got the farmers coming down one street, they've got the crafters coming down the side street, and in the middle is where they have the cooking demonstrations and music, and if you're going to meet someone at the market, that's what you meet. But on the same block is a film school, and the film school can't get into their parking lot, their classrooms, on the weekend, and now they petitioned to the city council to have this market moved, because they can't access their facility. Perfectly legitimate request. And it's a big controversy. So they got the petitions going to save the market out there. And last night, or this week, they had a big fundraising dinner with all the chefs donating their time. So we'll keep an eye on that and see where that one goes. But it's brought out all the love now that it's threatening. And people are calling it all these great things. One of the quotes I saw was someone said, "This is the front porch of Hollywood, this market." People of Hollywood don't have front porches, but the market is a front porch. So, the market's the big table. It's where we all, it's one of the few places where we all eat together. We have the urban connection where everything comes together. And I want to help you bring it all together and keep your market as a wonderful place here for now and in the future. So that's the end of my presentation. We'll open it up to questions and some heated discussion. Thank you.
If anyone has questions, I'll take them. Please, I'd like you to speak up as clearly as possible. We might do a little repeat to make sure that everybody can hear. But I see a hand right away.
That very last slide you saw is the big, I hope you know that to this market, other than maybe use the bathroom, but that table, communal table, you can pick up some meals and find a place to sit. Unpleasant bridge from the stone wall.
You don't like sitting on the curbs.
Too low stone wall barrier.
That's a good suggestion.
I don't know if that's what you plan.
No, I noticed that myself today. I was taking pictures of people sitting in funny places.
Yeah, they could make a collection of that, but it can still get funny as when it's you after a while.
It would be
as you always told me, you couldn't spare the space, you had to rent out everything when you can. What's the attitude on the next market?
Yeah, where is the public space in your market?
There ain't none.
Not really. So that's a good
I buy more food, not that I need it, but I buy more food if there was a place to sit and eat it. Good age for itself.
Good basic suggestion.
Other questions?
We have, as you know, a wonderful architecture school here. I think it'd be wonderful once you sit with the powers that be to figure out some locations that they have a design competition in which is 100% sustainable, either retrofitting some buildings, connecting them together, and bringing it into the community very strongly, as well as adding bike racks and having it so it's more accessible to people who don't have cars.
Can you hear her in the back?
No.
Repeat.
Stand I'm shy. I was suggesting with the Earth Architecture School, with this, we have here that we might throw out, once you all decide the powers that be, the possibilities of where we could have the new farmers market, since I understand, I'm new here, so. But to have a competition to make it totally sustainable and have it been extremely environmentally educational and community educational, and have bike racks so people can, who don't drive, can come, make it much more accessible. I also think it'd be great to have a bulletin board for maybe specialties that are going on by certain farmers, or a special highlight of a certain vegetable that seed that time of month, or, and the cooking and et cetera. And I love the idea of the gentleman's table, for eating. Even if it can't be one long one, at least some little small little cafe ones.
Ladies are welcome to.
I'm sorry?
Ladies are welcome also. Don't hold it against me.
But I think that, as you had mentioned very astutely, thinking ahead, not thinking a couple years, but 5, 10 years.
Where, Kathy or Brian, these are good suggestions, I'm going to leave, and where are we going to record this, or, write these down, or?
We're writing things down, there'll be.
So keep going, these are really, really good suggestions, or questions, yes.
I'd like to know, it seems to me before we start designing all the things we'd love to have, we have to have a location. Have you, have they shared with you the various options? Do you have any words of wisdom you might be able to share?
Yeah, we went and looked at a bunch of locations today, and we spent, there was kind of a little bit of a whirlwind for us. I did look at each site from each, a lot of the perspectives are really getting much feedback from anybody, and some who I was with. And the sites seem to have some pluses and minuses in terms of availability and cost and other users and access. And so nothing really popped out. Then we came back to the market, it was so alive. And a lot of people said, keep the market here as we today. They like that site. So I think until you find something that's better, people are going to want to stick with this.
I don't think there's any question that we don't like where the market is now. The reason why we're looking at the task forces considering looking at other property is because where we are right now is secure and it's worth a lot of money, and one day the city may sell it, and you don't want to be making a last minute jump without any planning. So, it's not that we're looking to move the sake of moving, it's we're looking for a backup plan in case that property gets sold to them.
No, yeah, I understand that.
Not everybody here does.
Yeah.
Could I ask you to elaborate a little bit more on consumer at the market? And I've been to a couple other events. I've got a foggy in my mind what the issue is. Is the issue that the city might develop that? Is that the only issue?
Yes.
That's the only issue?
No, it's not the only issue.
So what are the other issues?
There's the market's growing. And then there are requests from market goers to have things like that with facilities, with picnic tables, and places to put your bike, and better parking, and things like that. And more spaces for the vendors, walk between the aisles, more space in general. But there's a lot of positives when you are so there's some negatives. Looking at the whole picture.
So if I just follow up, so in your presentation, I think one of the points that jumped out at me was community societies that do something important, and that, hey, if this is important for our communities, and this is a good spot, and there's issues that we worked on, maybe our city council has to decide that this, forget about it, selling the area.
As you have for other, $15 million A lot of other cities have gone in excess of $15 million for their market, so that to me, it's $15 million. There's more money, markets are raising more money now than they have since the Depression, when there was money allocated for markets in the WPA program. But, you know, it's really up to, you know, if you wanted to stay there, you've got to make your case as to why and how. And it becomes a political issue.
And if this study brings us to the point of saying, okay, the best option is to get everybody in the community organized to make a point to city council that this land is always here for the market, then that's what comes out of it. We just don't know.
The question was how many people are on the waiting list? 100 people are on the waiting list. All right. Yeah.
I'd like to, one phrase that you said keeps...
Want to like boom a little bit?
Sure.
Hey, don't-
One phrase, something that you said keeps running through my head, and this is not at all to be unappreciative of the efforts of Charlottesville City and the people that work in Charlottesville City and everybody who runs the market. But you said that cities and towns are unburdening themselves of running markets, and I'd love to hear more about that, because it seems like that might, like an option, there might be a way for Charlottesville to still have its city market with some income going into the city and with some say as to how and where it happens, but not actually be administering the market, instead having some other entity administering the market that's not also running the city and doing all of the things that the city does. So I was wondering if you could give a couple examples of places that we might look to that you feel like have been unburdened by changing who runs their markets.
Well, I mentioned Detroit, and it's now run by a 501c3. Easter Market that burned down 3 years ago today. They are currently looking at unburdening themselves and turning the market over to some kind of a community-based organization. I don't know whether it's going to be it's to be determined, but they are going to get out of the market management business. But the cities are very, very important in terms, they're the landlord. There's a lot of things, the city, the market is an asset to the city. The city wants to have a good market. It's a great selling point. The city's always going to, you want the city to be involved with the market. In terms of, there's a lot of things they can do to help out. And wherever these markets have gone into another management entity, the city's very involved. And the city never lets the market go until they feel that they're doing the right thing. The cities want to protect that market. And they don't want to put it at risk by letting it, drift into some unknown entity. So you can set up like a market charter or some operating principles that would guide a public organization. But all of that stuff can come from the public. The city is the public. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
As you describe it, downtown mall is also a market. As it's been described, the downtown mall is in itself a market. It operates like a market, although the vendors are there permanently, whatever. Is there any possibility that the downtown mall could accommodate a farmer's market in its present state with some modifications of the side streets that would allow for bathrooms and bike racks? Or is there too much going on there now?
Well, physically, of course, it can be accommodated. I think that the use pressures there are a little bit different. There's a lot of entertainment traffic there. And have you been to Boston and the Quincy market effect? That was a market, but it's now become like the center of a tourist merchandising area, and it's really lost its connection with the local economy and the local agriculture. So I think the mall is great. I love it. walking there and having fun there. But in terms of, I think there's some kinds of markets that you could do there, but the farmer's market, I think you have to be very, very careful to make sure that that would work before you make, that was a final decision. But I think you could certainly integrate, well, even in where the market currently is, you could start connecting the pedestrian and the connection between the two.
Actually, I think it already is connected. What I understand is that downtown mall workers make a lot more money on Saturday than the spill over from the market, so.
Well, I thought it was a little funny or ironic that on the mall, you've got like best public space in town. You've got people selling sunglasses, but then you've got the farmers on the kind of relegated to the outskirts selling food. So things have been a little inverted, actually.
Actually, that's what I was going to ask. The research has been done to show just how much the city market as it exists in its present location contributes in terms of income to everywhere around it. Has that research been done? So what did you do?
If you want to come up and use the mic to ask a question, please feel free. If not, if you've got a good voice, stand up.
Did you get an answer to my question?
You mentioned doing it elsewhere, so I assume it can be done.
There's a lot you could research, but what has been done?
Seeing how much the
Here you go.
seeing how much the farmers market contributes to the surrounding businesses.
What was done?
Piedmont Environmental Council, we believe.
What did they find?
Yeah, that it benefits the surrounding businesses, yes.
It's just a general benefit.
I don't have this.
Yeah, I don't have this, we don't have the, it was a survey.
If you were to grade our market, forgiving its imperfections and lack of things.
I like imperfections.
No, but I mean the fact that we're not able to do what we really can do. Would you grade it A to F?
I think it's a great market. It's
Give us a feeling of
you have a good vendor pool. You've got a great customer. I mean, you've got some amenity challenges. I think I need a chiropractor from this meeting trying to balance myself.
Okay, question 2. 10 years ago, I had a woman living in a cottage on my farm who was a special assistant secretary of commerce in Washington. And she said to me, Laura, this is the richest county in Virginia. Why is it we can't get the funding to do this? Was 10 years ago.
The funding to
help this market.
I know. I mean, I'm working in Birmingham, Alabama, and they're talking about much bigger money to invest in their poor neighborhoods, and you're talking about investing in the richest county in the country.
And our little 501c3 doesn't have much in the bank.
Well, you have great assets here. Where do you want to apply your assets?
But do you think it's out of whack that our city and our county aren't more interested in companies like you're talking about, some places like millions to their farmers?
I don't think it's out of whack. I don't think you have kind of had to wake up in terms of the value and the investment opportunity that you have with the market. The market has proven itself as a viable institution. A lot of the roots of classicism, of urban classicism, are in here, or in your town. And a market is one of the most classic places, and I think it's being treated quaintly. And it needs to be treated with more seriousness. And if you're going to, there is an underlying real estate matter, and there is money involved. Pardon me?
What are we doing wrong if we can't mobilize?
I think you need to put more commitment behind the market. It's going to take more time and more money than you think to do it right.
Who is we? We have
You. This is a public market.
I have to throw this stuff. No, let's say we need the people that
Absolutely.
the county.
It's for your benefit.
The farmers,
Everybody, yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. All right, sir.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is James Hackett. I'm a candidate for the City of Charlottesville City Council. One of my platforms is to keep one of my platforms is to keep the farmer. I call it the farmer market. It's called the city market. I'd like to keep it down where it's currently located at, because there's also the city's already starting to expand down toward the coal power. The city of Charlottesville. I'm a small business owner here in the city of Charlottesville. The small businesses on the downtown mall also benefit from the farmers market as well. So I'd like to see it remain down there and have the city work with the current farmers market down, city market down there. But there's also going to be good things that are coming out, going down to the coal power and all that. So there's going to be space that I know that the city's going to be able to work with. If I can do anything in my powers to keep that farmers market where it's currently at, I will try to do that during my campaign. So I just wanted to say that to you folks that there will be active people on this current city council that will try to keep that down to the current level. It's right off the water. Yeah, so it's going down toward Market. Towards Market. Toward Market. That's where I'll be.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
We have several parking garages downtown, and I've been told they've never been full. But have you ever seen a place that has a city market and a parking garage?
Yes.
Does it work?
Yes. It can. You thinking of mixed use is a very good way to think. Thinking of a host. The Reading Terminal Market in Philadelphia, none of these markets can really afford to do this on their own. And they either need a partner, a host, a railroad station or a transportation station or a parking lot or something that can play the real estate game and the numbers, but they can also use the market as an amenity. So there are a lot of potential partners that could make this more viable. Yeah.
You're talking about farmers markets and city markets and community development, and I very much enjoy our market, but I do notice that it's not reflective of the population of the city as a whole, and certainly not in the neighborhood where it is. And so I was wondering if you could, and that's by class and that's by race, I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit and what are the opportunities, because it seems like a missed opportunity for our community.
Okay, the comment was that the market's not reflective of the city. I would agree.
Or of its neighborhood.
I would agree. And the more groups that you can have in the market, the better. People like to see their own. I was talking about feeling comfortable. If people see their people in the market, they're more comfortable. They feel like they're connected to that market. So in truth, it makes the market busier, it makes it richer, and if you're talking about community development, it makes it more equitable. And you can't just, a lot of the farmers markets are criticized because they're expensive and that they're elitist, which I think in some cases is true. When refrigerators started, they were elitist and expensive, and when medicine started, it was elitist and expensive. So it takes a concerted effort to outreach to make the market be a place for everybody. And it will make it more interesting, and it will make it more profitable, and you'll get more political support too. Yes, ma'am.
I've heard a lot of wish lists today, most of which could be provided by a management facility that was truly interested in the customers and vendors, which we don't have. The city receives income from the vendors at the market, and yet they didn't participate in funding today's program. There's very little incentive within the city to make the market better or to accommodate the wants of the customers. for the vendors. It seems to me that independence, which takes volunteer effort, it takes organization of volunteer effort, it takes people from all three, vendors, customers, and volunteers, to do this. And yet, for 15 years at the minimum, and 30 years at the most, I personally have seen this go only downhill. That's a beautiful market out there, but we need to look at what it doesn't do for us and what it could do for us that it doesn't do. And I'd like to see the talent within this room and what's available in our community to get together and do something about this that's not being done now. And I would like to hear ideas about what could be done in that regard. I'm a little bit more.
Yes? And I'm sort of missing the back.
I guess just related to, I think, what you were saying, and then what you're saying, there was a design competition 5 years ago on that site.
Can you hear in the back?
And what were the results? Because that was, the city had invested $15,000 and it was funneled through the Community Design Center. It was $150,000. Wow. Wow. So what happened to that? Because part of the program was to keep the farmers market. So there must be a lot, and there was a winner.
Does anybody know about what happened? Would you like to? Professor.
I'm Gary Oakland. I was involved in the creation of that competition some years ago. It really started with the idea that the market was under some stress. There were opportunities and the things happening between not only the market site itself, but its adjacent sites that it ought to be thought of collectively as some idea. And then there was a whole string of people that got together, signed a petition, and asked council to take a look at this and have a competition. And that indeed did happen. And the results are the one that's in my office for talking to you about are stored away. One of the things that the issue was where would it start and where would it go was a problem. Who would initiate something? There's several issues that cover there. One of them is there's an expectation that it's a very complicated project and a developer could come in and do it. And the other side of it was so complicated that the city really had to do it. They had the power to do with land acquisition and all the things that would happen. Very complex kind of thing. I think it has a lot of the ingredients that you talked about there, and it's probably all time to look at it again.
I'm going to go to the back a little more.
A related question, isn't there a large mixed-use development going in on Water Street that needs to be completed before the end of the year? Any updates on that?
Is there a large mixed-use development going on Water Street?
It's Waterhouse, and it has nothing to do with the city market space.
But it's supposed to be adjacent.
It's on the other side of, it's half a block away, and it doesn't impact the.
Sure. It's a factor. I was just curious about it. In relationship to the water, it's not competition.
It's where
You're talking about was larger than just the market. So I'm just thinking about saying that.
Okay. The gentleman behind you.
Yeah, I didn't really understand the gentleman in the front there. Is there a copy of that study that was done 5 years ago? Can we get it on the website? That seems to me a place to start.
It's a little difficult to see some of those things in scale because they're so complex.
I mean, not just the scale, that's the written part of the report. Is that available?
Here are any of the design on
There was no real report. The competition was international competition. All came in panels that day. And they were stored at the.
They were up at City Space.
I mean, it's on the website. Can we access it now?
It's accessible.
I'll have the information that you get on the website. It's a little difficult to see it online, but those things are still there on the market.
Where are all the original Are they accessible if you go in and ask to look at them?
Well, there's a little problem, the center is not open during my target accessibility. I think it'd be better for someone to probably bring them out.
But that's perhaps something that we could organize, at least kind of bring them out for another view. If people are interested in doing that. One of the things that I would encourage you to do, kind of sign up today, if you don't already get our newsletter from Market Central, we have a clipboard up there at the freshman counter. Please give us your email address. We'll make sure that you get on the list, and if you can organize something like that, we'll make sure that you get it.
Yes.
David, you complimented the community by being saying that they're very affluent financially and educationally.
Some of them.
Okay. UVA, with the wonderful UVA and the Piedmont Community College there, I can't imagine there isn't a plethora of capable individual students that would see this as a great opportunity to work on this, between the engineering, the architecture, the business plan. My God, UVA right here, what would Thomas Jefferson do? You know, I mean, he would look in the big picture and think, God, look at all the intellectual wealth here, and make this a premier problem that can be solved by the youth. And it gives them ideas on what they can do when they get out of this very elite college. And I
agree with you. I think you have the ability to pull this off.
UPA is doing a lot. There have been several student projects, and there's UPA Food Collaborative that I highly recommend that you check out. Food Collaborative at UPA is a number of different professors and classes that have been involved with the local food system and the local food movement in a variety of capacities. So there is.
But has it brought in all the others? I mean, with regards to architecture?
There are engineering professors, there are architecture professors, there are planning professors, there are.
Are you part of that?
I was when I was a student.
If you go to the website, they're actually presenting the results of their end of semester studies on this coming Wednesday night, and I think that's open to the public.
But who is taking it further? Who's implementing it? Who's spearheading it? I mean, it's one thing to, do it as a project, but then utilize it. What? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
It's not going to be the students, I'll tell you that. It's going to be the folks who are not transient and the folks who are here on a consistent basis. Not the ones that are paid to do. I love the professors, but they've got research they have to keep up with. So they do it on their own. They do it in their spare time, which is.
And I believe that maybe some of the alums, working with the development office, the people who are giving millions of dollars as an for endowments and everything. I mean, I don't know. Let's bring this. I mean, look at the Chinese.
Well, the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to annoy, piss off is a better word for it, the city. And the city is the one that controls the market. Right now. I don't have a problem.
I have a question on that.
Okay.
Since the city is such an integral part of the current market, what has the city told you all? And if you're so concerned, one of your largest problems being that you'll be asked to leave on short notice, have you asked them to give you a rolling tenure, 2 years, 3 years, with an advance quit notice and make a legal agreement so they cannot throw you out short run? Yes.
For one thing, when you say, why don't you ask the city to give you this and give you that, there isn't any us.
I assume there's a committee, Kathy.
There is a committee, but the committee does not run the market. The committee consists of a group of people who are trying to get interest in the market.
Then you need to make a link with the market so you have your teeth.
The vendors have no power in the market.
Somebody manages the market.
The city manages the market. Jefferson manages the market, but she manages the market. We don't have a say. We don't have a contract. We do not have.
All right. But did Stephanie call to the city? Or are you the city?
I work for Parks and Recreation.
So, can you get some specific commentary out of the city as far as this large focus area?
Here's the deal, is that getting the city to agree to leave it there for 3 years doesn't solve the problem, because we need to do something to make the market better.
Well, I said,
And it's not gonna work, because we can't work with existing site the way it is.
yeah,
It
we've
has
got
to be
100 vendors waiting on the list.
No, but I appreciate that, but it has to be improved if we stay where we are, and if you improve it, it costs money. And you have to own the property to be able to do that, we have the city to give to you forever. You can't make the improvement and then in 3 years, oh my goodness, we gotta go now.
3 years is not gonna help, that's
That's not gonna help.
Is that it's just,
It's all or nothing.
moving, you're gonna move, so it causes anxiety, so I don't think it's 3 years.
No one has any authority to city council.
Do you have any questions for our speaker?
I just want to interrupt today, but
Break
thank
session.
you to all those people who are here now. I did want to say thank you so much for coming for those
Sorry,
this evening. And I also wanted to remember to thank Kirby Hutto, who gave us the use of Thanks again.
I have can I ask a question? Of course. I had someone who was unable to come this afternoon has a burning question about how other markets across the country have handled smoking bans and whether or not it's been possible to ban smoking at a public market.
Yes. Sure you can if you want. Just say no more smoking. It's not the end of the world. I remember when I started running Terminal Market, everybody smoked. And we never did this 1980, it was fine. No one ever thought it was, but we stopped it.
Do you have any particular case in point that maybe was maybe a little more contentious, but how they tackled it?
No.
They just did it.
It's a very legitimate thing to do. If people want to smoke, they can walk somewhere and smoke if they want. You had a question?
I do. I appreciate that there are many, many people in this town through UVA and Piedmont and the Design Center, et cetera, that can help. But Rowena is right. The elephant in the room is the city. So somehow, Market Central and the vendors need to complete, I guess the completion needs to be done on the committee who's going to, is there a committee making some recommendation as to the site?
The task force is charged with reporting back to the city council with their recommendation on the site.
Okay, does that recommendation include that if it's their recommendation that we stay where we are, that somehow a transaction happens, that the city transfers the property over to a nonprofit like Market Central so that improvements can be made then? Or can the city make a commitment that we are going to have that be our multi-use market space and then improvements could be made on that block to include some of the people on the waiting list and have bathrooms and open spaces wider and have covers that could still become...
You have to go up.
But you could flatten the parking lot, have an underground space and a flat space that could then be planted with trees and parks.
David, isn't that where you come in?
Where I come in?
Yeah, as a consultant.
I'm trying to help. I mean, I think there are a couple of people with their hands up here next to it. I mean, let's just keep going here. I think this is going in the right direction.
My name is Bernard Turner. I am Vanguard Ranch with my wife. We are actually an organic producer. My concern is I've lived in this area about 30 years, watched the market, have been unable to get into it mainly because it's so full. First concern, I came to find out, what are the plans for expanding that space? Someone said there was over 100 and some vendors wanting to get into the space. I think that's a central issue that needs to be addressed. If you've got that many people waiting to get in, amongst myself included, then we need to address that issue. If we're going to make it better, then let's allow more people to actually participate in the market process. Lady Gillette mentioned the issue of diversity. Well, that continues to be a problem in Charlottesville and surrounding areas, and in fact in the country. These are all issues that we're going to have to deal with if in fact we're really going to be progressive about making positive change. We have to deal with the issue of sustainability. Any design should be sustainable and green. Anything else should need to be included. Just gentleman here said there was a study that was done, 5 years ago? Well, if they got the study, if the information's there, why aren't we using it? I mean, it seems like these are simple things. This gentleman here, he's on the city council office. Sounds like there's an advocate in the midst who would help to achieve these goals. As I see them, A, decision first has to be made if the space is still going to be available. If it is, what's the best way to upgrade it, make it more accessible, more usable, to expand that space and to give it the creature comforts that we want? Bathrooms, parking, transportation accessibility. How do we reach out to other people in the community who might want to visit that market, who are not being attracted to that market now for whatever reasons? How do we get rid of some of the elitism that does exist? These are all very, very important questions that have to be answered. And the other thing is, for any fellow producers here, yeah, there's an onus and responsibility on the producers to actually get up off their butt, stop with politicking, and actually do some work behind it to make it happen. Maybe it'd be a better idea for the producers to form their own 501c3 and find a space that they own and control themselves, and to actually own everything in it.
That would take responsibility.
And then, pardon? I've heard of it in reading.
That's why
Well, that's good. I think we need to do those type of things, because we can waste 20 years talking about what we need to do. And just get really busy, and find out ways to make it happen.
It's going to take more time and more money.
I agree. It's going to take time.
Yes, you
In watching your presentation, the idea that up in my head was that because of the constraints of land value, that you have to have something that's vertical. And it seemed to me the most logical solution would be to partner with the city to build a parking garage that can be used for parking when it's not being used for the city market, and it allows then you to grow up.
It's very hard in retail. There is going up is tough in retail. Big loss factor. But I think you're getting into this, the underlying real estate and the money thing. We always say that a market should be operationally self-sustaining, but it has to vary its capital costs. The market cannot even begin to consider itself as a conventional development project. So the money, whatever it is, we're working in Boston right now, and the city is giving a site at 27,000 square feet, the first floor of a parking garage in downtown Boston for the public market, giving. Plus, they're going to give about another $4 or $5 million to fit out the market. So it's really a mindset of the value of the market and your commitment. It's going to take a lot of work to make this right, unless you want to just move the market and have the market be operationally self-sustainable in a place that doesn't require a capital investment. That is also on the table. That seems to be the only thing that's on the table right now, not a more capital-intensive approach. And to pursue a capital-intensive approach will be an uphill battle. But it's done. It's happening in other cities because people love their markets.
I'm sure one thing that keeps coming up for me, beautiful photographs that you showed. Most of the cities, the bigger cities, have a larger population. Now, we have a reserved spot at City Market. Totally, we appreciate it. Day Ladies Cafe. And I appreciate that you want to get there because there's this waiting list. But, something to think about. We can all say doubling the size of the market will make it a better market. Playing devil's advocate for a moment, we noticed a marked difference. When Kathy left the market, the city made a decision to bring more food vendors to the market. Because she's got to fill the void that was created. We noticed a marked difference in sales because there's only a certain number of dollars that are going to be spent, which has to get spread out over more people. So we noticed a difference. So that's something to think about, we could double it. That doesn't necessarily make it a better market, it just means there are more vendors, and there's X amount of dollars that are going to be spent, and more money is going to be spread out amongst twice the number of vendors. So that's something to think about. And I appreciate you're not getting in, you want to get in there, I understand that.
No, let me clarify, because, just for a moment, whether I get it to the market or not, that's not the main reason I'm here. But my point of clarity is this. I understand your point about the more vendors, there will be more division of income that comes into the market. That's fine. You still have to allow for growth. There's people who want to get in, and I think that needs to be really looked at. I know that I can bring very viable products to that market that people would want. Competition is great. That's what America's built on. It's not a problem. You're going to need that. So I don't think that the number is, it's more about having the facility that could, if the community can embrace it and there's vendors to bring their product there, I think the people will step up. I think that we would embrace the challenge. I'm not afraid of bringing my product to market. I don't care if there's 50 people who bring what I bring. It doesn't matter to me. We need to have that venue. We need to have a space to be able to do it. It will grow. It can, and this area can support it. There's enough money here to do that, for sure.
There are ways to grow the market, like in other cities, if they've got the central market, which is the money market. If you want to get into that market, you can start out in another market. If you have a market, the city can run a market system, and you can run a bunch of markets. You've got 3 markets right now. So to get it, once a good market gets established, you can pilot or farm people in a secondary market, and then you work your way into the slots, into the lucrative market. So everything isn't set. You can grow this thing laterally. I don't think all the growth has to come in one particular spot. There are a lot of ways to grow the market, to grow the local food economy, to grow the local economic opportunities, and to sort of think beyond what you have right now. And I disagree with you about that. You said something about, if another vendor comes in, it means less money for others. Every time I put a new vendor in a market, I was told by someone, you're going to put me out of business, and you're making the pie smaller. That does not happen. We're on a big growth curve for these markets right now.
I'm just telling you that when that happens, there's only X amount of food that gets sold to the market that gets
Prepared food. Prepared food. All right, well.
We're not talking about tomatoes or whatever. I'm saying prepared food that people walk away eating. We know it's a market,
Well, you have to be very, very careful with prepared food, because the demand for prepared food in the market is much stronger than the demand from farmers. And if you over-tenant a market with prepared food, you're eroding the true nature of what the market is all about. So it's really more of a privilege to be there with prepared food, because you're living off the traffic of the market, and you're providing a valuable service also. But it's the mix is the alchemy of the market mix is very, very important. And it's sort of miasmic. It changes. Some markets every week, they see everybody who wants to come in, and they decide, all right, they reset it up every week. So who's had their hand up for a long time that I haven't seen? You.
Well, I just wanted to say that some of you may remember me from 25 years ago when the market started. Sheep Appreciation Week. Was anybody around for Sheep Appreciation Week? Yeah, when it was just 5 tables. And it seems to me that Charlottesville must have changed, because back in that time period, people didn't say, oh, well, we got to find funding, so we got to work on funding to do this, and then we could do it. They did things, and then they went looking for funding. And that's how the Women's Health Center, there are a lot of institutions in Charlottesville that started exactly that way. And I'd like to see Charlottesville go back in that direction.
In order to get the status that the Boston example gets, does it have to operate 7 days a week, or at least more than 1 day a week, to justify the setting aside
the Boston situation, the 27,000 square feet will be an indoor market that will probably operate 6 or 7 days a week. There's an outdoor plaza that will probably be a few days, which will be farmers only. Adjacent to that, there's another market called the Hay Market, which is a resellers market that only operates 2 days a week. So it's the newest piece in a market district that has all these sub-markets that are creating the larger whole.
Dave, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 quick questions, and I think we're going to need to do a wrap up.
Okay. So, because you haven't talked yet, right? You can have a half a question and a half a question.
Other agrarian needs in the community. We have no home for the fair. That just pops into my mind, but there are other needs for artisans and aquariums. They need a facility in addition to what we now call the city market, in my opinion. Just not a question.
Just wondered, do you have any experience where it would be a multi-jurisdictional effort where city and county work together to
Yes.
create a network?
Yes. And I'll just, it's fresh in my mind because I was working on it this week, is in Boston. The state is part of it, the city is part of it, the transportation department is part of it, the agricultural commissioner is involved in it.
So just Google and Boston.
Well, yeah, you could Google Boston Public Market. The state is actually driving it. The governor really likes it. And the city is behind it. The agricultural commissioner is behind it. The fishing community is behind it. So, yes, frankly, the more the merrier. I mean, the more the messier and the more the merrier.
On that note, I think we're going to need to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for coming. Your passion about the market is obvious by you being here and your questions and caring about it. Dave, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.